Welcome to this housing-related conference session, which is called How Do We Fix the Housing Crisis? Big thanks to Leeds Building Society for working with us on this particular fringe. Let me be bold and hopefully not controversial, or you can tell me that when we get to the questions. I think we do have a housing crisis. I think we need to grapple with the housing crisis, and the crisis, at the very least, has quite large economic problems for us, or creates large economic problems for us. But I also think, and this is more for the politicians, it creates quite large political problems for us in terms of how we move forward with policy. And it's not just, although we will talk about this a lot, it's not just a numbers crisis. It is a quality crisis, however you define that. You know, if you think about affordability, housing affordability in Oxford is 17 times the average wage. It's ridiculous, and it's going ever north in that respect, and those numbers are getting larger and larger. On the energy efficiency front, if you look at somewhere like Burnley, 75% of its housing stock has an EPC rating of C or below, right? Real massive problem, and the prices in Burnley prevent us from doing that through normal market mechanisms. So big problems, big elements of crisis, whether you're thinking about affordability or quality. But I would say we do have a crisis. So we're going to talk a little bit about the problem, I think, but we're also going to talk about solutions. What do we do about it? And what do we do about it, you know, thinking about the national picture, but also the local picture. And we've got a bunch of brilliant panelists to explore these issues over the next 60 minutes. So in no particular order, we have Rachel Maclean, MP, Minister for Housing and Planning, Ben Everett, MP, Chair of the APPG for Housing Market and Housing Delivery, Housing Market and Housing Delivery. Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and writes an awful lot about housing. Well done, Henry. Nothing wrong with that. We'd never apologise for that. And then we've got Richard Fearon, who's the Chief Executive of Leeds Building Society. So the way we'll run it is the panellists will open up. They'll say a few things in their opening comments, 2-3 minutes. We'll have a bit of a chat depending on what they say, and then we'll come to you for your questions. Please, the panellists will be short and brief and to the point. When we come to you, if you've got a question to put to the panellists, be short and brief, please. Not long conversations where we listen to you. We want to listen to the panellists. So apologies now if I cut you off. Don't take it personally. So to kick us off, Henry, give us the picture. It is a crisis. What's the crisis?
Yeah, I'm going to assume that we just agree the crisis exists, right?
Well,
because otherwise, I mean, just for the sake of this discussion, the housing crisis is an absolutely existential danger to the Conservative Party, because it is a whole generation, multiple generations now, are simply not able to acquire any of the things that used to be what sort of helped transition people over into being Conservative voters. The young professionals in London are even into their 30s and more, and this is on good professional salaries. They're living in house shares, they're renting, and that's not just a matter of the sheer scale of their income, the share of their income that they're paying in rent, which is often, I think, what we focus on as a quantitative thing, which is easier. But it's also just it delays adulthood, right? You're not able to design your own space. You can't buy your own furniture. You're constantly at risk of having to move at short notice, which means that you don't acquire. You know, I wrote a whole article whinging about how hard it was having lots of books as a renter, and there's all kinds of little things like that which add up, and they add up to this sense of alienation from the Conservative Party and indeed generally. And I think that the problem that the Conservative Party has, and indeed the British politics has, is that basically the bodies that we've given responsibility for housing have the worst possible political incentives when it comes to housing. Because who votes for councillors? It's people who already live in an area. And there's no representation for people who might like to live in an area, or indeed for the nation as a whole, which would profit from that area changing and growing. And so what you end up with, and I've done an awful lot of Tory housing things, and there's usually this element of, oh, well, yes, no, of course there's a housing crisis, but not where I am. Like, you need to keep the right homes in the right places, not here in Little Whinging where, you know, we've got a very special, you know, town character that we need to maintain. So, I mean, we can get into solutions at a later point, but I think that there are optimists who think that you can actually get people on board with planning by making homes beautiful and whatever, and doing things like street votes. I'm not one of them. I think that the way that you do planning is effectively you have to wield power, and you have to have successive governments effectively using things like development orders strategically to just short circuit that process, because ultimately the tests for any infrastructure, and I think housing is key in national infrastructure, is not whether local residents desire it, it's whether the nation requires it. And that also means that you shouldn't end up having this system where you're only providing homes for local people and the children of local people, right? Other people should have the right to move into a town and build a life there as well. So that's obviously very difficult to sell as a general principle, and I think the reason that planning reform has failed is because the government to date have always tried to do kind of full fat national planning reform, which maximises opposition. And I think there are ways to do that where you could target it more carefully and frankly more politically. But if we don't do that, then we are going to end up in a position wherein the Conservative vote is essentially just eventually a shrinking pool of people who came up and built their assets and built their lives in a set of economic circumstances which do not exist, and an increasingly resentful younger working age population who have no reason to vote Conservative.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Henry. Good opening comments laying on the line. Good luck, Rachel.
I love Henry's team.
Yeah, they're quite. Good luck, Rachel. Good luck, Rachel. You're next.
Oh,
you know,
next.
deal with the I did tell you that. Deal with the housing crisis or wither into oblivion is basically I think what is the analysis. So we deal with it, or the Conservatives are no more. So
yeah, I think
it's a problem.
no, it is, and I am going to start by agreeing with Henry's premise for the reasons that he set out, and I think he sort of put his finger on a number of things. If I can perhaps just in my opening remarks talk about 3 things that I think are important to solve this. And by the way, before we do, let's deal with the elephant in the room. I know some people have been to my talks yesterday. What does this number mean to you? The number 15.
Number of housing ministers.
Thank you, that lady. She was in my talk yesterday because I think it's important to get this out there and own it. I am the 15th housing minister, but I've also had the longest tenure in the role since Kit Malthouse. So, and I intend to stay in this.
This is a plea for you to be housing minister come what may the next
Exactly.
parliament.
So I'm going to carry
the first
on.
kind of crossbench housing minister,
Yeah.
if that's were to arise.
You never know.
You never know. You never
want
know.
to take the politics out of
Well,
that.
you know.
Anyway, my view from being the longest serving housing minister since Kit Malthouse is that there are 3 key things I'm going to kick off with. Number 1, we're in the Centre for Cities talk. Cities have a huge role to play. I don't believe that the cities can meet all the housing need, but they can certainly meet a hell of a lot more than they currently are doing, which was a centrepiece of what Michael talked about in his long-term plan for housing, which he set out in King's Cross back in July. And that is going to involve some quite serious interventions into places like London, places like Cambridge, where we solve the water shortage, other places like Leeds, which by the way are totally up for it, and probably Manchester and a number of other places as well, where we can go much further. We can break down some of the barriers, we can use the power of government, frankly the chequebook of government, to get more houses built in these areas which desperately need them. I mean, if London was actually delivering what it should be delivering, frankly, we would go 99% of the way to fixing the housing crisis, because that's where the affordability pressures are the highest. And this is not an opportunity for me to have a go at Sadiq Khan. Oh, of course it is. But actually he is failing his voters on this, because he's got this really misguided attempt to build social rented housing, which means he's just not building any houses at all. It's a glacial pace of development. He's doing it all wrong. Anyway, I'll leave that there, but I've said it, and I think it's absolutely right. So we do need to intervene and step in.
Yeah.
The second point is the planning system. Many people have said, and I'm sure they'll say it again, take the politics out of planning. That's pie in the sky. It ain't going to happen. We live in a democracy. If you'd like to take the politics out of planning, I'd like you to present me the alternative by which we can actually, with the consent of people, get anything done in this country. No one likes democracy, but consider the alternative. Okay? So I'll just leave that with you. We have to be much smarter than that. We have to stop this fight with YIMBYs and NIMBYs. Everybody's right about this. Everybody's a NIMBY, by the way. As soon as they actually get their house and they manage to move out of the crowded flat with no room for the books, they are going to become a NIMBY, I guarantee. Even if they've been campaigning on the YIMBY place, they will be a NIMBY then. We have to take communities with us, and I think we can do that through some of the things we are doing already on the Levelling Up Bill and the reforms that we are making. And I could get into that later, but I genuinely believe that there are some quite transformational things in there that will enable communities to see the benefits of planning. It will enable more cash to go into the system, get that infrastructure built ahead of the planning, and get the whole system commanding a lot more trust and, crucially, working faster and stopping this delay. Finally, I do believe it is through the market. the market needs to deliver. We need to do a lot more to enable the market to deliver. We cannot, with the best will in the world, just use taxpayers' money to build houses that are subsidised without having private sector capital in this industry. It is, I'm afraid, it's just unrealistic. So we need to figure out how this system works as a whole and put it on rocket boosters and let it deliver, because that is the way. If you get, you know, people often say, oh, I don't want these executive 5-bedroom homes near my village. And as though, I mean, you're totally right to say that this actually, that's kind of racist. If you really boil it down, it is. Because you're not racist, but you're saying I only want local people to buy a house. I mean, it's just, actually it's outrageous, and it's completely wrong to say that, because why shouldn't somebody else want to move to your lovely village? And so if you build more 5-bedroom executive houses and stop demonising them, what do? You free up more housing stock lower down the ladder. So we have to get the whole system working.
Brilliant. Okay, lots to come back on already. Marvellous. Richard, thoughts from you?
Well, I might start somewhere different.
Good.
First off, I suppose until lots of people came in the room, they might not have heard of these building society. They probably think building society is where Granny takes her passbook to go and get it updated, or what have you. So I thought I'd just spend a minute talking about us, because it's relevant actually. So we've got about 900,000 members, and we lent £5 billion last year in mortgages, and 1 in 2 of those was to a first-time buyer. So it's a big focus for us. And technology is a big part of what we do. Henry was telling me I think application to offer was about 6 months, whereas we've managed to get some applications to offers in 30 seconds. So we're the fastest lender in the market. All the fintechs you hear sort of talk about what they can do. It's a building society. So that's, you know, we think we're qualified on one level, and we've been around since 1875. So I think, I don't know, how many years were the 15 housing ministers? Less than 15.
Yes, less.
So to contrast that, so I'm the 8th chief executive since 1875. So long-term thinking is kind of in our DNA, and you know, a lot of people write about purpose-led companies. We've been purpose-led since we were founded. It was all about helping people buy a home. We were founded in one of the poorest areas in Leeds. And our purpose today is just that. It is putting home ownership within reach of more people, generation after generation. So we've done some things over recent years which are in line with that. They've cost us money. So, for example, we pulled out lending on second homes last year because there's about 500,000 in the UK. They block up, you know, those are houses that could be bought by people that want their only home. And, for example, we did a partnership this year with Experian to factor in bills into people's credit records. So things like Netflix, things like the council tax. We're working hard on rent as well. So we're really focused on that purpose. And for us, it's kind of long-term thinking. And for me, there's a reason I'm passionate about this. Go back in my family history, and this is relevant as well. So 1953 was the year that my mother, at the age of 5, moved into her first council house. It was also the year, 1953, where Churchill and Superman, that was the first year we built 300,000 homes as well, as part of that mission in the 1950s, which gave so many people that opportunity. So it's got real resonance for me, and that, I think, came up at Conservative Conference in Blackpool in about 1950. That came off the back of that target that we still talk about today. But the difference, and you can see it on the pamphlet here, some of the things that were possible then are just not possible today. So to be a first-time buyer today, it is staggeringly difficult. And this report looked at the last 40 years. So 40 years ago, it was tough. It was really tough. Interest rates were high, but the average deposit was £2,500, or 2,100, in fact, quarter of annual salary. The average deposit now, nearly £69,000. That's 115% of salary. So very, very few people can afford that unless you've got parental help, unless you've got government help. So I think I want to start with that. There's a crisis. It's tough, and I think we are going to risk this lost generation of first-time buyers. We talk in the report about 426,000 in the next 5 years. That's bigger than Coventry. That's bigger than Leicester, Cardiff, you name it. It is a lost generation. So I do think that we've got a huge political problem coming our way. And the only other thing I would say, that it is very, very complex. I was on a panel earlier with Rachel and others, and it got into talking about all the solutions. There aren't silver bullets. There are lots and lots of bullets, and it requires that long-term thinking. A lot of it's around supply, building enough homes, and we haven't built 300,000 since, I think, 1977. We haven't built 340,000, which is probably what we need since 1971. So this is decades and decades in the making. And so more homes, more affordable homes, help with deposits. There are lots of things here. But for me, I just go back to that purpose. Because for us as a building society, you hold the purpose up there and you go, what can we do to pursue that purpose relentlessly? And I think our view is that every generation deserves a home. Why should it be any different for people nowadays than it was 20, 40, 60 years ago? So we think we need a national mission to prevent this lost generation of first-time buyers, and that starts with building more houses.
Brilliant, thank you very much indeed. And you're right, offering a different perspective. Just to forewarn you, I'm going to give you a sense, get you to think about whether we can do anything on the money supply side that makes a difference, a material difference to people being able to access on a rental or on an ownership basis, whether there are innovations and developments that we could have there. So just forewarn you when we get into the conversation, just have a think about that. Ben, your opening remarks. You've heard from others. You get the advantage of filling the gaps.
It's genuinely good to go last for once.
Yeah.
Normally get called first on this kind of thing. So, firstly, it's great that this room's packed. It's a sign that we are talking about the issue that is possibly the most fundamental, and this isn't the first packed housing fringe.
No,
yesterday was absolutely packed. We had housing drinks last night, which was absolutely packed as well, and it's so nice to see so many people have managed to make it after that late one. It was great fun, but it shows that this is the issue that we need to be grappling with. I was sort of reminiscing about Rishi's 5 priorities, which we're trundling through as a government and on track, and thinking, why couldn't we make housing the 6th? And the answer is because it's hard, because it takes a long time. It's the most politically difficult part of any policy area to cover. It's expensive, it's hard, it's contentious, and it probably is not the kind of thing that you can make one of those pledge card pledges on. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't address it. I keep telling the kids, too hard isn't a reason not to try. And that's why we're here, and that's why this room's packed out. And the truth is that the housing market, as we view it today, 2023, isn't a market. It's broken. It doesn't operate. It doesn't have the features of a market. You can't, supply and demand don't talk to each other and produce an outcome that it provides a competitive, low price product of a suitable quality for a consumer to buy. Just doesn't operate. So how did we get here? I think decades of tinkering have caused us to get here. We've kind of had a sort of a cause for optimism from Richard about it can be done, admittedly in 1953, but we can meet our numbers. But we need to be really clear that it's not through demand-side interventions. There's a place for that kind of thing, of course, but it is the hard bits now. It's supply side, and as Henry has bluntly illustrated, that's the bit that is the hardest, most politically contentious way of doing it. So, why am I an optimist? Why am I convinced that the time is now to resolve this? Firstly, everybody's here. We're all talking about this. Secondly, we can seize this energy. We can cut through the kind of the NIMBY-YIMBY false dilemma that is portrayed. It shouldn't be like that. As Rachel said, you can't take the politics out of housing. No matter how many times people say, oh, you should just take the politics out of it. You can't, because it's fundamentally important. It is the most important thing to most people's lives. So it's going to be political. So we just need to win the politics. We need to do the politics differently. We need to change the planning system, which is just, it's not broken, it's just set up to be adversarial. That's where a lot of the politics comes from, is the adversarial nature of the planning and construction system that we have here in the UK. We do that, we go a long way to actually engaging people. Now the bit from Henry's introduction that sort of triggered my thinking was that I don't disagree that we shouldn't be relatively forceful in the way that we implement policy. The thing that we need to do is take people with us. We need to engage people at an early stage. Because time and time again, when communities think that they're having something done to them, they react, and that's where your NIMBYism kicks in. If people think that they haven't got a say and their community is having something imposed on it, they will say no. So we need to find a way of winning the politics, of changing the conversation, and bringing communities with us. Now it starts with engagement, it starts with sensible, proactive policies about communities and placemaking, and communicating what communities actually need and what families need to stay together.
Okay, brilliant. Good. So we've got the opening comments. We'll come to you very shortly, so get ready with your questions. But I just want to explore this issue because I hear this a lot and it's come up already. So basically, Henry said it's all about power, not about beauty, right? I mean, which is basically you need
Beauty
to impose.
matters, but you
you need to impose as well as bring. But both the politicians, which I fully understand why, you've talked about taking people with us, and so just Rachel, what do you actually mean by that? Right, when you say we're going to take people with us, we need to create a system where they, I mean, we've tried that, right? I mean, we are, if anything, the system is overly weighted towards trying to bring people with us, and the performance has been woeful and it's getting worse. So what's going to change?
So not quite to the premise of your initial challenge. So we have a plan-led system.
Yeah.
Where it's going wrong is where the local area doesn't manage to do a plan for whatever reason, because the people who are advocating the plan, they get voted out, they get replaced by everybody who's campaigned vociferously against any housing in the area.
Yeah.
Where local communities can do it, there are a variety of ways that they can do it successfully. They actually can produce plans that deliver. So across the country, if you look at the stats, you've got a local plan in place, you get 14% more houses built. Obviously, it's a small number, but across the country aggregated, that's quite significant. So it does demonstrate that this local plan system has got something in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a germ of success in it. Now, clearly, sometimes it doesn't work, and we get into the position where we've got some local areas who've not done a plan. I think the City of York has not had one for 40 years or something like that.
1957.
Yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a few others. I don't want to get into the naming and shaming too much, but we do have intervening powers, and we have used them. I've used them since I've been in the role. And it is right that we do that because they are accountable to their residents, and that even if they can't agree, they're letting them down. So I think we need to make that the heart of the system is a planning system. We need to make it work better. We're doing all of that through the reforms that we're bringing in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. So right now the planning process just takes way too long. It takes years. We're going to condense that. We're going to make it simpler because we're going to remove some of the stuff that people have to do time and time again and put that into national standard policies. So in a sense, you're taking some of the arguments about it and it becomes less piecemeal, more standardised. We do need to use tech a bit better. Rich has talked about that. There's ways that we can use that. But that all does require investment. So we are actually investing quite a bit in the planning system right now. We need to get those planners in those local areas to be able to do that and do it properly.
Okay. So I'll bring Ben in and Henry in a second. Just a second question then to you, Rich. So you picked out Leeds and London. I have sympathy with the point that you make. London has a plan-led system. It produces its plan but doesn't build the housing that we would ideally want. But you want to intervene in that place, even though they've got the plan. But what you just said is that you want places to have a plan. They have a plan, but they're still not building the housing required. How do you resolve those two issues?
So I think it's when you've got a national infrastructure deficit, as we have in housing in London, it is incumbent on the government to take decisions in the national interest, which is what we've said that we're prepared to do in London. Now, clearly we want to work with the local area, and we want to work with London, and we're doing that now. But ultimately, it is a responsible thing to do to make sure that London is delivering the homes that it needs. I can talk a lot about the London plan. It's got all sorts of things in it it shouldn't have in it, in our view, but we do need to work with them to try and actually get them to deliver the homes that are needed in London.
Okay. Henry, do you want to come back in on the power, and I'm not saying power rather than beauty, but the power aspect and the whether this taking people with us, etc., What's
Yes,
the limitation?
That's not right. I think there's a few problems. We talked about pie in the sky. The biggest pie in the sky is that you will ever be able to take people with you to the extent that's required. Right? You can definitely do some useful granular stuff around the edges, adding a few houses to a village and so on. But fundamentally, we're 4 million houses down, right? And if you built those, you would fundamentally change how large parts of the country look.
Mm-hmm.
And that's absolutely fine, because change is natural, right? I live in Hornsey. Hornsey is apparently one of England's oldest hamlets. It's fulfilled its rightful destiny as a London suburb. But had it not done that before the Town and Country Planning Act came in, houses would cost £5 million, and everyone would be saying it's absolutely essential that it never becomes swallowed up by London. So there are just limits to the extent, and this is the same thing we have with everything. It's why you can't build pylons, you can't build railways. You know, large parts of the country have avoidable drought every year because the government hasn't dared to tell the Vale of Whitehorse District Council that it is actually just going to build the reservoir there. So ultimately, you need to wield power, and it is political. You can never take the politics out of it.
No.
But you need to use central government to make this happen. And I think it's interesting that we talk about democracy, because local democracy is not the only form of democratic mandate that there is. And I think that actually it's a problem that the current system grossly overweights whether or not people who already live in an area are happy with it or want it to change, when in fact there is a national need here. And I think that it is actually perfectly democratically justifiable for an elected government, which is, you know, we live in a parliamentary democracy, for an elected government to use its power to impose housing on a local area. We're not the Holy Roman Empire. We don't need to negotiate with the Prince Bishop of the Isle of Wight in order to get things done, right? We can just do it. And Town and Country, Section 59 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, the development orders, one of the most sweeping bits of legislation I think I've ever seen. You can effectively year zero the planning system by ministerial fiat, and we should. This, for example, would, if Rachel signed it, presumably not this, but the text. This is a permitted development order that would just grant permitted authority to development within 1 kilometre of any railway station, and you could sign that tomorrow, and that would become law. Now, obviously, railway stations, there's a lot of them in Tory seats, but if you were being really ruthless and you were the Conservative Party, inner London, the inner parts of our biggest cities where there is a massive demand and frankly no Conservative MPs, development of them. Just completely zone them for housing. And then when Labour come in, because Labour will do the same thing if they're smart, they'll go around the blue wall and they'll just build lots of houses there while the Tory MPs howl in impotent fury from the opposition benches. And frankly, that's how this works, because there is no, and it's really weird to say because this isn't normally how we talk about policy, but there is no like getting all the grown-ups around the table and like finding a way in which everyone will be happy, given the fundamental clash of interests at play here. You need to break the deadlock, and fortunately, we have a constitution that allows you to do it. So I'll just give Rachel that so she can take it away.
No, very good.
Pretty much what we're doing in London.
Yeah.
So let's get some questions up. Henry, you start us off. So affordability, massive issue. It's all the fault of the developers because they don't build enough, and even if you give them more permissions, they still build out at a steady rate. And the reason why is because of red tape. How much of that is true? What do we do about that?
I mean, I suppose it depends on how you define red tape, but I think one of the problems we have is that we do have a system where we have large developers who can act in some areas as cartels.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is the planning system, right?
Yeah.
Because the planning system bakes so much uncertainty into the process of building that you know, a project can be called in at any point, it can be subject to endless. So that's why people land bank, for example, because if you're a developer, you need to have a continual stream of work. You can't guarantee that a single project will actually be viable by the time you finish the last one. So if we want to have a more diverse and competitive developer sector, which I think we do, the crucial thing is to have a planning system that makes single project developers viable, right? Somebody who can come in, have one project, do it, and then do the next project, because they know, because we've got a master plan or a zoning system in place, that as long as their proposal fits that plan, they can definitely build it, and they won't have to go before the planning committee of the local council and have it kicked over or have it called in by the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So actually, I think those two dovetail quite nicely.
Yeah.
We need to break the cartel.
Okay, great. And we'll come to Amy's question in a second. Rachel, to you, I suppose, are you worried that if you reform the system and it boosts supply, that the developers don't respond, which is why then you don't reform the planning system? Is that too complicated?
So I sort of agree with some of what's been said about large developers, but not all. I mean, if it was as simple as just big developers are bad guys, we could just like regulate them, etc. It's not the whole story. having said that, there are some things that we can do to make sure that those developers, when they've got planning permission, do build out faster. We're doing that through some of the legislation we're bringing into Parliament. But I do think we do need to do a lot more for SMEs, and I've said this on a few panels actually. I started and ran a small business for 30 years before I came into politics. I know what that's like, I know how tough it is. So I've got a huge ambition and energy to diversify our industry. There's quite a few things that I'm working on in terms of how difficult it is for them to get planning permission, how difficult it is for them to access sites, to get the finance, to get the land. I think there is a lot we can do, and I'm really working on that because I think it's so important. By the way, Richard, you're completely right. I'm a mum of 4, and I'm also a grandma of 1 child, and I've got another one on the way. So this is how I'm thinking now. I really am thinking about the next generation and the one after it, to your point, Callum. And I recognise that if we can't help people own capital, I mean, that's what people vote for. They want to, we are supposed to be on the side of capitalists. And in this particular market, it is a real problem. It's not just about developers are bad. It's about a whole suite of things that have gone wrong across the whole system. Yep. But we absolutely do need to, and actually we are, as I've said quite a few times actually, making some quite fundamental changes to the system in the way that it operates.
Okay. Richard, I'll come to you in a second, Ben. Do you want to come in on partly an observation from Amy around generational issues, but gender issues and access to to housing more generally. But if the broader point is, in a supply constrained environment, there are lots of bad outcomes, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely right, and I was reflecting on Amy's point, and I did some roadshows recently internally, and I think since we've articulated our purpose, I get lots of people come to me with their experiences and say, so there are ethnicity divides, or there's issues, for example, lenders will only allow gifted deposits from very close family, but actually in some cultures, close family is different. So there are lots and lots of these things that we need to try and address the barriers. Part of the difficulty we face is we've got certain regulations, we have to be able to afford it. So that's sort of one constraint. There's work going on that to try and make sure that for longer term mortgages, actually you might be able to flex some of the affordability requirements and open up some of that. But it's a really good example, and it's actually an example I have talked about with some of our customers and colleagues internally about how do we identify some of the pockets and people and support them. So I haven't got like an answer to say this is the thing, but the thing that I do know is that I've got 1,800 people that work for Leeds Building Society who are constantly thinking of what are the barriers here, how can we knock them down, how can we do better, how can we strive to push forward. But thank you for this.
Right. Ben, do you want to come in on, well, I can come on that obviously, but also the conundrum around if we improve the system, do we get the response on the housing development side that we ideally want, and what might more we need to do?
Well, no, we won't get an immediate response because it's, the situation's so complicated. I was struck by what Rachel was saying about the Conservatives were on the side of the capitalists. I think that in this, we're on the side of markets working for people, and at the moment there's clearly not an efficient use of capital in the housing sector, and I think that's the bit we need to address. Getting built out is going to be a challenge, and it's very easy to blame the developers, and politically that's kind of how the system's set up at the moment. And I've told this anecdote a few times over the course of this conference and before, but I used to be a councillor on a planning authority, and
my commiseration.
Yeah, indeed. It's kind of, this is why I do the housing stuff now, because I can see that it's so broken it doesn't work for anybody. But one of the experiences that there are probably quite a few councillors in the room that they will share with me is rocking up to a parish council on a kind of cold and wet Tuesday night, expecting to be sat there with a few parish councillors and potentially a dog, opening up the door to the village hall, and it's absolutely rammed, and you just think, oh God, I've missed a planning application. It's definitely going to be planning, and it is planning.
It's karaoke night or something.
It's sadly not in the parish councils. But by the time that planning application has got to the community and that parish council is packed, you've lost. You've not engaged with people at the early enough stage. They've already got their backs up. They feel like something's being done to them, and they're blaming the developers. And the developers, the councillors, the planners. And the natural political thing is for the councillor to just go, well, I want to be re-elected, so I'm going to oppose this, so I'll have a go at the developers for you. Even if I lose, I'm on your side, etc., etc. So the system doesn't work. But the truth is that no developer gets up in the morning and goes, do you know what I'm going to do today? Land banking. They don't. You know, the developers and house builders are in the business of building houses. That's what they want to do. The system is broken to the extent that the most rational thing for them to do at the moment is sit on a plot of land so they can manage their build out. They can provide a yield for their shareholders and so on. But there's so many other things that we need to fix. The land values, the skills in the industry, the availability of labour and materials, the planning risk that is factored into the business cases of all of these developments. Build out, though, is so frustrating because planning authorities do have pretty much all the tools they need within their own powers to make these things happen. And it's a lack of political leadership at council level, it's a lack of skills and experience and confidence, it's a lack of resourcing. That's what causes quite a lot of these build-out delays. When you've gone through the pain of the planning system and actually got something approved, even if it's locally controversial, it will be, to not have it built, it's soul destroying.
We've still got hurdles to go, which says system maybe not working right. So I'm coming to this side. Local plan is good, but lots of them don't have them. We had a housing target. Do we still have a housing target? What's the weight? What does that mean?
We do still have housing targets. So this is a sort of very live debate, and there's a lot going on in this debate. We never actually had a housing target in the way that people think we did. We had a housing need number, and actually I was going to sort of say that to you earlier, Henry, because you did make the point quite legitimately, I think, that it is in the national interest for us to say that you in Sittingbourne and Sheppey ought to build this number of houses. Based on some, people call it a mutant algorithm, I just call it a sensible way of calculating housing need, which is what we should be having, because we should be thinking about what is the growth that this area needs to have, both now and in the future and in the foreseeable and planning ahead. That's what we have at the moment. We are still going to have that. What we are just going to do is slightly change the way it is interpreted by local areas to deal with some of the political backlash that occurred. I mean, like it or not, we are elected. We have to deal with people who are also elected. So we have to work through the system and get to the maximum outcome which we all want to see, which is housing being built. So we still have got housing targets. We haven't dropped housing targets. We will still have them. We still have 300,000 houses that we need to build across the country, and we need to figure out how to do that, and I've talked about some of the ways that we are going to do that. It's not the case that all the local authorities have stopped their local plans on the back of what we did. There are all sorts of things going on in the system anyway, local issues, there's legitimate reasons why they might want to review, etc. We know the state of every single local plan in the country in our department. And I can tell you that the numbers that are reported in the public about they've all stopped, it's just not accurate. We do have intervening powers. I've intervened only just recently, and we absolutely will continue to do that. We have put some local authorities into special measures because they weren't passing planning applications quickly enough. And to your point, sir, about the housing that you need to build, that is the number one thing I hear. Like, we put the applications in, but it takes weeks, months, and years for us to hear. And then there's all these reserve matters, and that takes ages as well. So we do bear down on those local authorities and put them into special measures where they need to be, at the same time as putting additional funding into the system. Leasehold, yes. We're going to bring forward a leasehold bill to fix the issues that exist in that leasehold sector. It is outrageous that people are buying houses, they think they own them, and they find they're trapped in this leasehold situation where they've got all these additional costs that are coming out of nowhere. And it's just completely unfair, it's unjustified, and it's wrong, and we're going to stop it.
Okay, very good. I'll come to those in a second. Richard, Help to Buy. Would you be an advocate of some form of Help to Buy type intervention at this particular moment?
I think the difficulty is if you're taking a long-term view of this, we have not built enough houses for 46 years.
That's why we're
so
Help to Buy.
that's the thing we've got to do now. Help to Buy is a bit of a trickle down by the house builders, a few more are built. So 1977, the year where we last hit the 300,000, half of the houses were built by councils. So I think council house building has got a really big role to play in it. Yes, so I think Help to Buy and things like that to help people on the ladder find, as long as we are building enough houses, and we've got an unmet need of 3-4 million, it'll depend which figure you...
But which way round are you doing that?
We've got
to
build, because if you just pick another short-term demand-led solution, it just exacerbates the issue, and you get surging house price inflation, worse affordability, etc., etc. So we've got to go to building more houses first.
Okay, good. Ben, housing targets, we have them, but we're going to allow people to have a bit of wiggle room if they don't really want to build the housing that they want to build.
Yeah, I mean, look, we need targets. So we need targets to achieve stuff, and I'd love to get down and dirty, get the bonnet open on how we calculate the targets, because I think that's where the action is, and frankly that's where the politics was as well. The 2020 planning right white paper had some really good stuff in it. The zoning stuff was really interesting. It was it was probably the way forward. It needed tweaking. It needed a grown-up conversation about it. What was politically stupid was announcing the housing targets at the same time. Just killed it. We had old Toryshire MPs, old Toryshire South MPs, who were just up in arms about the whole thing, and we didn't manage to have that sensible conversation about what we needed to do to reform the system. And there was so much good in there, digitising, simplifying, codifying, all that kind of good stuff about planning that just got lost, that set us back. And then of course, pandemic as well didn't help in terms of the pace of the reforms. So yeah, targets. Politically, we need a grown-up conversation about them. I know this is an area of contention between Henry and I, but I'm quite passionate about recognising the demand stimulation effect of some of our levelling up funding.
Okay.
Obviously, we've announced another $1 billion to go to towns, 55 towns around the country.
Indeed.
That's on top of nearly $5 billion already of Levelling Up Fund, High Street Fund, Towns Fund, Shared Prosperity Fund. There will be a stimulating effect from all of that investment. That's the point. It's about opportunities. Opportunities mean jobs. Jobs are done by people, and people live in houses. If we don't put the right houses in the right place at the right time, to the right quality and right price point, we run the risk of all of that investment, billions and billions of it, not being sustainable. Having people commute into those areas and then commute back again and build their lives and their families and spend their money elsewhere. And so we do need to look in the way that we put targets together at the stimulating effect of some of those levelling up funds as well.
Okay, very good. Henry, do you want to come in on the target or no targets and what targets?
I mean targets. If there's no consequences for not hitting them, the targets are utterly meaningless, right? Because you'll go, you ought to build that many houses, and they'll go, all right, and then they won't. And again, they have no incentive to do it because their local electors are people who already live there and are doing quite well, and they've got an asset that is appreciating faster than wages. And why on earth would they? I think it's important to recognise that fixing the housing crisis will have losers, right? There will be people who will be genuinely distressed that there is a line of pylons over their view, right? Or that there is an additional estate. And you can't get away from that. There's no designing or consulting your way around that. If you're going to fix this, you are going to upset people who don't want the status quo to change. So, and I also think it's given the Conservatives generally believe, as you say, in sort of the operation of markets, the very fact that we now have central government basically having to do the political thing of being like, we're going to put this many houses in this constituency is nuts, right? If you're the Conservative Party. So I think that definitely, but you need to have real teeth, right? I mean, personally, I would just go with Builder's Remedy or something. Like, if you don't hit the target, then it's a complete free-for-all. Again, I suspect we won't get there. But on the point of dispute with this panel, you do not need to take all of these people with you. Actually, you don't. And you can't. And, and we'll be here in 20 years' time. Leasehold, because I don't think anyone's addressed it yet. I'm always reluctant to talk about leasehold. My Twitter catches fire and I have to mute a lot of people. I have a leasehold flat. I assume at some point the government is going to steal the freehold from me, which will be nice. But leasehold is a problem that the Conservative Party kind of made for itself, right? Because the original leasehold was actually a perfectly sensible product. It was a midpoint between renting and buying. You bought a right of occupation, which you could trade as an asset. It depreciated in the way an asset normally depreciates. And it allowed, especially government, for example, to allow land to be used without losing a controlling interest in it. So, but we have turned it effectively into a weird second-class freehold, right? So I've bought a leasehold flat, and the freeholder is mostly fine. But I found out last week that if I want to do a loft conversion and the loft that is demised to my flat, I will have to pay them 50 grand just for the privilege of doing that. And again, if it was an original leasehold which had traded at a much lower value, that would be fine. But given that I've paid almost the freehold rate for it, that does seem iniquitous, and it is going to change.
Absolutely right. Great point. That's a great point. Henry, infrastructure, is that the way to think about housing? Gentlemen from Peabody would probably have a different view. Is it helpful?
It is absolutely in the same category as every other form of national infrastructure. If you're thinking about its impact on the economy and on day-to-day life, setting aside the qualitative stuff, railways, ports, reservoirs, water piping, electricity infrastructure, housing, it should be thought of exactly the same way. It is a national priority with as least as big an impact on our overall economic performance as any of those other issues. So absolutely.
Okay, great. I'm not going to ask the panel to answer every question because I want to get another round and give you another shot.
In which case, can I do social housing at some point?
Okay, well, I'll really come back to you on that. Rachel, Sadiq Khan, why is he wrong?
So there's nothing wrong with building social housing, and I didn't say that, to be clear. What I said is if you focus on building only social housing rather than building housing overall, you will not get a desired outcome. The best way to get more social and affordable housing is just to build more houses overall. The overall housing supply will enable you, because you are allowing developers to come in with Section 106 and SIL contributions, etc. And also, by the way, Sadiq Khan has had billions of pounds of government money to build these houses, but the truth is he hasn't delivered what needs to be delivered compared to the scale of need in London, where the affordability crisis is the most acute. If you look at some of the briefing statistics that have been provided by Leeds Building Society and others. So because he's gold-plated all the planning regulations, he has his own London plan which goes way beyond what the national planning framework wants. He's constrained supply of housing in London, and that is the problem in London. That is why we as a national government need to use some of the powers that we do have to, frankly, go beyond what he's done.
I'm massively in favour of that. Just
good.
do it in loads of other places as well. Maybe have a different political persuasion. That would be my challenge to you, in the sense of intervene in those areas as well as in the cities where the persuasion might be slightly different.
Most of the people talk about the sort of conservative shires housing. Actually, most of those places have built way more houses per head of population than Sadiq Khan has done in London. I just think it's really important to be clear about this. This is not a kind of backbench Conservative MPs are terrible, because if you took all of them, you will find that all of their constituencies have actually over-delivered. We do have teeth in the system. It's called the housing delivery test. People hate it, but it has worked. Because what that means is that if people have not, if those areas haven't built the houses that we have said they should build, they go into this thing called the presumption against tilted balance, that's it. Which means that then the developers can come in and get planning permission on any site, even if it's not in the local plan. Okay. And that is the thing that's really eroded trust. But it has delivered houses. Okay, very good.
Then it feels like the Wild West for communities.
Correct.
And then
you go back to where we go. You get back to that sort of issue. Richard, do you want to say anything about local authorities? They had a bigger role previously, but the planning system is very different at that point in time. Do you want to say anything about that? And actually, maybe we need to give them a bit more support.
Yeah, well, I think they do. I think we'll need private builders, we'll need housing associations, we'll need councils, local authorities building to do this. I'd probably just make a couple of other points. If you build more houses, there's lots of evidence from around the world that shows affordability improves as well,
exactly.
Which is really important.
Point I was just making.
And then a point that might be disagreed with, I would just argue if we've not hit the target in 46 years, the teeth in the system aren't sharp enough.
Controversial. Very good. Questions around social housing. Obviously a question about rent. In general, the extent to which we cover it, I think you talked a little bit. You did talk about it. But then there's no evictions, which I'll get to with the Minister.
Well, I'll leave others to talk about some of the policy points. The point I would make, and even though we are super focused on home ownership, the market has to work together. So where do homeowners save up a deposit when they're in a well-functioning rental sector or social rental? So all these tenures, be it shared ownership as a bridge from renting to owning, be it rental, it all has to work together. And I think we've, over decades, kind of squeezed the balloon. We lost a lot of the social housing stock. Landlords have been under some assault. Yes, we're encouraging professionalisation, but you can't. You have to look at it holistically. And so I think, my heart goes out to renters. It is. I was on the tube the other week in London, and a lady opposite me was sobbing on the shoulder of a friend because her rent had gone up £400 a month, and she'd been saving and now she was losing money every month, so she was never going to be able to buy, and it's impossible. So it's really important we've got a well-functioning rental sector too.
Okay, I'll come to you last, Minister, if that's okay. Ben, can I pick up questions about the relative role of social housing? On the one hand, we've got the no eviction stuff, which I know Rachel will pick up, but then there's a question about planning or finance, which, you know,
And the infrastructure question.
and the infrastructure question, if you want to pick those up
So,
as well.
I mean, I think social housing is such an incredibly important part of the mix. Genuinely, it is so necessary because of the affordability gap that we've got across the country. What we need to do is recognise, just as Richard was saying, there's this whole ecosystem that works together of different types of housing, different types of tenure, and we need to make sure that renters are included in that as well. Council housing, social housing, affordable housing, and then things like buy to rent, build to rent, shared ownership, key worker housing. All of this is so important because the honest truth is you don't grow a homeowner overnight. Nobody gets their A-levels and goes, right, off to buy a house. It just doesn't work like that, and it frankly never has. So we need to recognise that it's an ecosystem that needs maintenance and care across the whole of it. On the infrastructure point, I get that it's so important we need to treat it like national infrastructure. The thing that we need to remember is that houses are homes and homes are where families grow. And that brings it right back to that point about engaging with people. What is the purpose of a house? And that's politically where we need to be talking, because otherwise we lose people. Again, they feel like something is being done to them. On how important it is, I've got a report out. This is a minor plug for the Hacking Housing report that we launched yesterday. 9 hacks to fix our system error in the housing market. And one of those, there's a big theme on it called making planning sexy, because we need more sexy planners. But one of those things is to make the planning ministry sexy. And what we need to do is recognise that housing is the solution or the enabler to so many other aspects of public policy. So put the housing minister in the cabinet and put it in the cabinet office with reporting lines, direct reporting lines from junior ministers in every other government department, because housing touches jobs, education, transport, business investment, all of these things, environment, all of these things, health, are enabled or led by housing.
Very good. Okay, Henry, you've got 60 seconds.
We're going to take more than that. Just not much more. I'm going to take rental and social housing together because I think you can tie them together. Rental is, I was a renter until last year. My rent went up 20% in 2 years. Like, it's absolutely, and I was in a 4-bedroom rental where they put up a wall to. So I totally understand. I think my wariness about the Renters Reform Bill is I got the white paper open for that, and I controlled F regulated tenancies and assured tenancies and got absolutely nothing. And I think it's worth bearing in mind, this country did have a very sticky, highly regulated system, and successive governments took an awful long time trying to dismantle that. So I'm very wary about effectively kind of recreating it without looking at it. On social housing, a related point I think is there is a potentially, it is very important, but I think there is a problem with trying to impose, with over-relying on it as a palliative. Because one, it means that you end up with government picking and choosing who gets housing, which I think as Conservatives we shouldn't like. It's also why I didn't like Help to Buy, because it mandated you have to buy a new build, and you can prize my original features from my cold dead hands. But it also means that you get the problem where, in many areas of London, people who are in market housing and who are sort of the net contributor taxpayers who are paying for social housing and everything else are increasingly getting priced out of areas. And if those areas have a very large level of social housing stock, which some parts of London do, I think there's a basic equity point there. You know, in a few years' time, given the rent increases, the area where I was renting, people on my salary will have moved 15, 20 minutes further out. The council and social tenants will be there forever. And I think that if London's rent crisis keeps getting worse, that is going to potentially become a source of political resentment.
Yeah, I agree with that. Minister, last word from you.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to get more affordable housing is just to build more bloody houses, and to quote the young Liberals, and that applies to London and everywhere. By the way, Section 106 is not the only way that we actually ask taxpayers to fund affordable housing for people that can't afford the market prices. We do that through something like 11.5 billion quid of grants that we give through the Affordable Homes Programme, which I'm sure that any registered social landlords in this room will recognise and have used to enable them to actually build houses which are affordable, shared ownership, first homes, key work homes, a whole variety of things. Yes, We are going to bring forward the Renters Reform Bill. It is right that we've taken some time to talk to colleagues in Parliament, some of the things that Henry said. There's many other concerns. It's right that we do that. It's right that we take landlords with us. They actually are. There's a lot, I just want to put on record, there are a lot of really good landlords in this country. There are bad ones. There are a lot of really good ones. If we end up by driving out the good ones of the sector, we're not going to help anyone, least of all the people who are crying on the tube, which is awful, obviously. And that is why we go back to, we did stand on a manifesto for that, and we will bring that forward.
Brilliant, 12:31. I apologise for the 60 seconds over. Thank you very much indeed for coming in a very warm room. Thank you, panel, please.